And as many of you know, in April, the Asian Development Bank published a very, very excellent report. I urge you all to read it, about the impact of AI, advances in AI, and also in industrial robotics, has spread some concern amongst policymakers and economists that this may lead to a risk of widespread unemployment as the robots come and take our jobs. So thankfully, I've not been replaced by a robot yet. You know, what this report shows, yes, that there are risks that, especially for lower income workers, that they may see some displacement. But there were also many, many positive aspects to this development. And of course, we know that Asia has made huge advances in the last few decades, from a largely agrarian economy to industrializing countries. 30 million jobs are annually created in the last 25 years. Every year we see that kind of increase. But people want to know how policymakers should respond to the new technological change, and that's what we're going to be discussing. You know, where are the potential pitfalls and where are the you know, the advantages that we can seize on, because of course they create new opportunities. So I'm going to start by inviting Carlos Dominguez, who, of course, is the governor for the Philippines. And the Philippines, of course, our host nation this year for the annual conference, and, of course, the headquarters of the Asian Development Bank. And Carlos Dominguez is the finance secretary for the Philippines. But he was also a former cabinet secretary for agriculture, natural resources, and the environment. But Carlos, you also bring a lot of business experience to what you've done, because he's worked as a CEO for 2 Philippine banks, and you were also president of Philippine Airlines. I came on Philippine Airlines. No, fortunately, it was really lovely. I came to Manila on Philippine Airlines. It's doing well, sir. Don't worry at all. Yeah, very good. So perhaps just before I come to you to speak, we're going to show you a video which is just going to highlight some of the issues that I have just mentioned. So if our technical team would be so kind as to play the video, and then Carlos Dominguez will speak after that, picking up on what the video has also said. So roll the film, please.
Technology has transformed Asia. These advances have propelled growth and led to dramatic reductions in poverty and improvements in our living standards. Our region has been a leader in adapting to a more globalized world. In 1980, it would have been unimaginable to say that by 2018, the People's Republic of China would be the world's #1 exporter. India would lead the world in IT services. The Philippines would be the global center of business process outsourcing. And Bangladesh would produce more garments for export than any other country on earth. But the landscape is shifting. Technological advances are accelerating. Jobs once thought to be safe are now in the crosshairs of what many are calling the 4th Industrial Revolution. Doomsayers say millions of jobs will become obsolete in Asia. But there is reason to be optimistic. Asia's growth has led to a booming consumer class. Across the region, workers have more disposable income to buy electronics, clothes, and services. While the production of things like garments and especially electronics have become more and more automated, these industries continue to add jobs. And as economies become more advanced, there is more demand for workers requiring high levels of cognitive and social skills like managers and nurses. We don't exactly know what the future of jobs will be, but we do know this. Hundreds of millions of workers in Asia will face incredible transitions over the course of their careers. We need to learn new skills. We need to learn how to learn throughout our lives. And we also need stronger support for workers in industries that become obsolete. The rise of the machines is already happening. Asia's example can lead the way in preparing for a future with quality jobs and inclusive growth. We must act now to prepare for this change.
Terrific. Thank you very much indeed. So my panel, as I said, President Nakao, ministers, thank you all very much indeed. But Carlos Dominguez, who is chairman of the Board of Governors of the Asian Development Bank currently, you want to expand a little bit on that video that we just saw. So please be my guest.
First of all, let me greet Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Taro, who was the chairman of last year's meeting, which was held in Yokohama, and everybody had a lot of fun there. Ibu Mulyani, the Finance Minister from Fiji, Asian Development Bank President Takehiko Nakao, my fellow finance ministers, ADB governors, distinguished guests, good afternoon. We are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. It is driven at a breathtaking speed and rapid changes in technology. While we may not fully understand where all the disruptive technological change will take us, we must innovate our institutions to improve our ability to deal with the transforming environment. Technological innovation sweeps the entire horizon, from manufacturing to biotechnology to information sharing. 10 years ago, we could not have imagined the advances in genomics, personalized medicine, and 3D printing that we see all around us now. New business models such as Grab, Uber, Amazon, and Airbnb were unimaginable only recently. Underpinning the fourth industrial revolution is the explosion of data, the rise of data analytics, and breathtaking advances in cloud computing. Because of cloud computing, anyone can harness unlimited computing power. With big data analytics and cloud computing, machine intelligence becomes more powerful by the day. Some are enthralled by the possibilities. Others are fearful of its consequences. But we cannot bury our heads in the sand. The change sweeping the landscape is unavoidable and irreversible. Recall a century ago how new manufacturing methods seemed to cause such disruption. In 1910, General Motors sold 39,000 cars. By 1924, after the Great War, the same company sold 600,000 vehicles. By today's standards, that was a small leap. Today, technological obsolescence could happen in a matter of weeks or months. Technological change destroys as well as it creates. What could make institutions tentative and social orders very fluid? In the midst of constant technological disruption, how do we lead effectively? How do we cope with the changing requirements for education and skills? How do we ensure we have the infrastructure to support a rapidly reconfiguring economy? How do we ensure affordable access to goods? How do we provide enough safety nets for people? How do we adopt ethical standards for artificial intelligence that will be accepted by all? These are questions that our conversation today, I hope, will lead answers to.
Thank you very much, Carlos Dominguez, for that overview there. But just very quickly, I wonder if you could just touch on something which is being discussed here in the Philippines. The IT BPO, the IT business process outsourcing sector, accounts for about 6% of your GDP, employs about 1 million people. And of course, it's a job that doesn't require a lot of abstract thinking, and therefore it's quite vulnerable to automation. How prepared are you in the Philippines for that?
In 2016, when we took over the administration, one of the first meetings I had was with the BPO industry. And I pointed out that machine intelligence was just around the corner. And since then, I'm very happy to say that the members of the industry have accelerated their training, their upgrading of the skills of their workers, so that we can move up the value chain, rather than stick with the simpler methods of BPO out processing, like call centers and all of that. So while they have been upgrading that, they have also been upgrading the connectivity, the physical infrastructure, the internet availability in the Philippines. We have also been able to spread the industry more outside Mega Manila, and we have big centers now in Cebu as well as in Davao, and I understand some companies are going up north.
Right. Okay, good. Maybe you'll tell us a little bit more about some of the things that you are doing as we continue our conversation. But for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Sri Mulyani Indrawati, hello to you. Minister of Finance, of course, and the Governor for Indonesia. And, of course, this is your second stint as being Minister of Finance, because you left in 2010 to go and be MD of the World Bank Group. So somebody, of course, with a great deal of economic experience. But in terms of this issue of the impact of technological change, both based on internet services and on industry, just what's the picture in Indonesia?
Well, as been recognized widely, technology can improve productivity, and for Indonesia, that is actually shown in a couple of sectors which is growing very fast because of technology. We have 10 unicorn, that is the IT-based company that has become very big, like Gojek, Tokopedia, Lazada, which is really creating a more productive, reducing transaction costs, more efficient transaction, and linked to the small, medium enterprises. That's including financial inclusion. This is one that is a proof that technology can improve productivity. But at the same time...
Can I just interrupt you here for a moment? Because Gojek is what you just mentioned, and some of you may not know what Gojek is. It's the chaps on the motorbikes, mostly
motorbike, mostly, but
it's a bit like
now
Uber, but for
also.
motorbikes.
Yes. It's more like Uber and Grab, but it's also, then they become like a conglomerate, because they are now providing a lot of services like Go Food, Go Massage, and many other.
Go Massage,
Go Clean,
did you say?
So you
do they do the massage while you're actually on the motorbike?
No. You are at home. After you're
relief.
working very hard, Zainab, you need a massage, you just call and then they will come.
I'll come all the way to Indonesia. I'll go back with you and get my
Gojek
massage.
We are going to host the annual meeting in Bali for the IMF World Bank. You definitely will be good there, and you need massage after that.
Thank you.
But this is one of the proof of this productivity. But we also recognize that technology can create disruption and widening inequality. And this is because those who can really take advantage or use technology to improve productivity and performance is those who's educated, those who get the access, those who actually have enjoy the infrastructure. So for Indonesia, in this case, we are a big country, 257 million. We are an island country. In order for us to make sure that technology will create more upside benefit and manage the downside risk, the government now focusing in managing the risk by investing in infrastructure. So for the people, wherever they live, they are going to be able to have an access. Or small, medium enterprises who can link to this kind of Gojek type or Tokopedia, Lazada, like Alibaba type, they will be able to actually marketing their product, so get the advantage of this technology, but then can be connected with the customer because infrastructure enable them to be connected even though they live in a remote area. Because you can have like a special coffee in Indonesia, which is saying that this is the best coffee. Indonesia have a lot of coffee, Zainab, so you know that every place is going to say that our coffee is the best coffee. So make sure that they are going to be able to be connected with the market. You really need to have an infrastructure. Second, I think the government also recognized that people, especially labor, need to be upgraded and trained, just like Sonny mentioned earlier. And this is exactly now the focus of the president, to create a vocational and on-the-job training that would allow them to continue adapt. We are still in a very early stage, and that's why we are now designing, for example, incentive for the company to be able to continue train their employee. And second one, for those who's not yet employed, they are going to be able to have an access to this kind of vocational training. Third, I think for Indonesia, although we've allocated 20% of our budget for education, we are very worried about the quality of the result of education. And this is in terms of curriculum, quality of teachers, and so on. You know, in Indonesia, a young generation, millennia, now knows that Indonesia need to have a good quality of education. So they created an apps or a company, startup company. They call it Ruang Guru. It's actually a room for teacher. They actually now looking at many of the Indonesian students who doesn't have a good access of good teacher. They will be able to actually use this app. They actually hiring good quality of teacher so that if you have any problem in physics or even chemistry, they actually can talk and have this kind of training from the Ruang Guru. This is one of the wonderful innovations.
Really, a lot of innovations which are really transforming a lot of sectors in Indonesia, be it education.
The last thing that I would like
to
add.
You've got more chance to speak. You don't have to say it all in one go.
I have a lot in this case.
Yeah, but carry on.
Yeah, well, the government also want to use this technology. So, for example, Indonesia, as I mentioned, a big country. When we design the program social safety net to support poor people, I think India have the biometric ID. Indonesia also try to identify by name, by address poor people, so that we will be able to transfer the cash money to their account, and that create also financial inclusion, link it to the services which is related to their health, making sure that their children will be immunized, getting enough nutrition, go to school.
That's how you see the impact of technology is how it transforms the provision of public services and also all the other things you've mentioned.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So you seem to me on the whole more
Not to mention feedback, Zaina.
Sure.
Because people can easily disappointed, and then they just go to social media. And then they say that why I'm treated this way.
So it's a tool for governance as well.
That's
good. Well, you've given us a lot of factors there. Thank you very much indeed, which we'll come back to discuss, and perhaps the audience wish to raise that. But let's go to Taro Aso, of course, Deputy Prime Minister of Japan, also Minister of Finance and Minister of State for Financial Services. But also in the past, he was Prime Minister, he was a Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister for Internal Affairs, Communications. What haven't you done, sir? I mean, sounds like you've had every job in the Japanese government going, and of course the governor for Japan. So when it comes to this issue of robots in particular, 4 of the world's 6 biggest industrial robotics makers are Japanese. So I think we're all very interested to hear what you have to say about the impact of technological change on jobs. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for giving me this kind of opportunity. Well, technological advancement will boost economic growth through a productivity revolution. However, technological advancement could lead to wider inequality and lower labor share of income. In order to minimize such economic and social costs, job creation through a technological advancement is key. Strong economic backbone will support such job creation, and I believe that quality infrastructure investment will play a significant role in this regard. When you hear the term of quality infrastructure investment, what comes to your mind first may be safety or economic efficiency in view of life cycle cost. However, the significance of quality infrastructure goes beyond its physical value. Quality infrastructure that is open to and available for everyone will gear up and foster economic development. More specifically, the quality infrastructure investment sustain the inclusive growth through the creating positive interactions between promotion of private sector investment, job creation, the capacity building, and the sustainable borrowing. The virtuous cycle for economic development is indeed another critical value generated by quality infrastructure investment. Tsubasa Bridge in Cambodia is a good example whose image appears on the Cambodian banknote, cash note. The bridge is not only resilient against the frequent floods, it also promotes the economic development of the region by connecting major roads over the river Mekong. Toward the G20 next year, Japan will place more emphasis on the role of the quality infrastructure investment as a global public goods in materializing the virtuous cycle for economic development. Specifically, we need to upgrade the principle on quality infrastructure investment. We will also prepare the comprehensive menu of support measures. In upgrading the principle, we will highlight again the economic efficiency, consideration of environmental and social impact, and the resilience against risk, including natural disasters. Japan will also emphasize the governance, in particular responsible financing and openness as its important elements. For the support measures, they will range from the upstream activities, namely project preparations, to downstream activities, namely financing for projects, and cover the development of data on quality. We believe that such menu will help the developing countries invest in quality infrastructure with full ownership. As of upstream the activities, Japan is considering the additional financial contributions to the ADB's Higher Level Technology Fund. On downstream activities, Japan has a new proposal. Taking a full account of global trends on ESG investment, Japan will establish a new financing facility, Japan Bank for International Cooperation, so-called JBIC. This facility provides support for the variety of the infrastructure projects that contribute to the environmental preservation, including the renewable energy project. We expect this new facility to take the lead in assisting the developing country in a new dimensions. Under this new facility, Japan will closely cooperate with the international community, for example, by co-financing with ADB.
Thank you very much. So you proposed a new kind of assistance measure there to promote quality infrastructure projects in developing countries, you said, because that creates an enabling environment for technological change. What kind of infrastructure projects, Deputy Prime Minister, are you thinking of?
Well, taking a full account of global trends of economic sustainable growth investment, JBIC new facility provides support for the quality infrastructure project that meet a certain standard. As a potential project, we are considering, for example, renewing the energy project, such as geothermal and wind power plant, and the green mobility, such as public transportation that substitute automobiles. I believe that such a project will also contribute greatly to global environment preservation.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy Prime Minister. Very, very interesting. Thank you. Aiyaz Sayed-Khaiyum is the governor for the wonderful island of Fiji, next year's hosts, and of course is the governor, therefore, for Fiji. You wear so many hats, but finance, attorney general, minister for the civil service, for communications, and all the rest of it. I mean, that's like 6 cabinet posts in one. But, you know, I've had on my pigeonhole here one question or one point, which has said, discussions have been about technological innovation and financial inclusion, as we heard Sri Mulyani talk about. Small island states such as those in the Pacific, don't want to be left behind. So this is your chance to put the small Pacific island states in the sun.
Thank you for that. I think there are two aspects to technological adoption or the use of technology. One is what can be called as your primary technology. That is access to, for example, mobile phones, internet.
Microphone, yeah.
Access to, for example, mobile phones.
Carry on talking and then it will help him locate the right position. And then you can't move.
Sorry, so there are two aspects. One is what we call the sort of basic access to technology, your mobile phones, internet connectivity, etc. And the other one is what the subject matter of the video was, and the paper written by ADB was in the area of artificial intelligence, where robotics is sort of taking place of human beings. And what are the challenges and the job losses perhaps in the re-engineering of those people to be able to take up better paying jobs. I think in the Pacific, from a Fijian and indeed a Pacific perspective, we are not in that space, the second stage. We are more in the space of providing accessibility to technology, and that is to improve people's lives, in terms of connectivity. For example, we have climatic events. We are like Indonesia, an island state, but we are spread over thousands of kilometers of the ocean. But to be able to have warning systems, to using technology, to be able to provide accessibility to, connection, just basic communications, or a fisherman is caught a catch, and where can he get the best price? So if he has access to mobile phone connectivity, he can go to the right market. So that's the space that we are in, and obviously we see technology as a very positive aspect. And indeed, we do not necessarily have the large economies of scale that Asia has, and the ADB paper essentially focused on the Asian countries. But the Pacific does not have the economies of scale, nor do we have large-scale industries where we have large-scale manufacturing. In our case, for example, only about 5 or 6% of our total GDP is from the manufacturing sector. And there's also fairly niche marketed. So just give you an example, unlike Bangladesh, we may not produce 1 million pieces of one particular type of shirt, but we, for example, supply uniforms to a private school in Melbourne or Sydney. So that has to be very much tailor-made for for that market. So we are in the niche market. The other point that I'd also like to make is, of course, about 35 to 30% of our total GDP comes from tourism. And tourism, of course, we do not want robots to actually welcome us when we get off the planes or at the hotels. We need the human touch. So that, again, is in a space in the services sector. I think we'll see in the services sector that we want to be able to ensure that our people are trained to be able to improve the quality of services. But no doubt technology has also come into that space. So things like revenue leakage is stopped by having advanced technological changes in the hotel industry to be able to monitor revenue coming into the country. And that's very important, so we adopt that.
So if you have a hotel and it's got 500 room occupancy and 300 rooms have been occupied, but they only register 150, you will know.
Absolutely, and we want to know.
Right.
And we want to collect the taxes that come from that too, because that, of course, increases your capacity. But again, as highlighted by the Gojek and the Uber and what have you, that adoption of technology also creates more jobs. I mean, you have people driving those sorts of vehicles now who previously would be sitting at home. So it gives them living, more opportunities to earn a living. So essentially, from our perspective, I think we are trying to place ourselves in the future. So we have set up 13 technical colleges. We've made education free. We give access to universities too, because we see an opportunity. For example, Japan has an aging population. They want retirement homes. Fiji is a fantastic place to have retirement homes. We are currently, for example, making advances in our health system. So we've recently worked with IFC and World Bank to set up a PPP in the health sector. So if we can provide an internationally certified hospital, then it will give opportunities for Japanese home care companies or Australian home care companies to come into Fiji, set up those shops, and we actually be able to provide that level of service that is required of them.
You've got a long working life ahead of you, Taro, so you will never retire. But would you retire in Fiji? Would you like to retire in Fiji? You've got an invitation from the Minister of Economy there.
3 months in a year, 6 months.
3 months in a year. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Thank you very much indeed.
And then another 3 months in Indonesia.
Oh, right. You're going to have a fantastic retirement when you get round to it, by the sounds of it.
And then in Cebu.
6 months in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Can I take early retirement? In fact, can I start now? President Takehiko Nakao, President, of course, of the Asian Development Bank since 2013, but also previously Vice Minister for Finance in International Affairs in your native Japan, and Chairman, of course, of the Board of Directors of the Asian Development Bank. So you've heard here quite a collection of views. What do you want to pick out to talk about?
Yeah, as you kindly mentioned, we produced the report about the impact of new technologies on the job in our Asian Development Outlook report published in April. And we discussed whether the jobs losses is a serious issue, or we can produce more jobs. And as we shown in the video, we have a more positive views. In a sense, I'd like to take a more contrarian attitude when other people discuss concerns about jobs. The reasons we are more optimistic is because we have so many robotics and AI and mobile technology and so on, but most of jobs comprises so many elements of tasks. So even bank teller or driver or any other jobs or the workers in factories of government, one job comprises of so many things to do. And it's very difficult to replace this job with a lot of tasks by robotics or AI and so on. The second point is, even if it is possible to have a fully automated sewing machine, it can be very costly. So when I visited Bangladesh, I visited very clean, safe, and beautiful factories for knitting and also for the woven products. And I asked the manager, and they are using, in a sense, robotics to some extent. But it's not possible economically to invest in huge amount of money for a single sewing machine. So many things we can maybe do that technologically by investing a huge amount of money, but it is still more reasonable to employ workers with the certain talent and techniques and with reasonable wages. And third, this is a very important element, and as Secretary Dominguez showed in the video, maybe the auto was very expensive and it was a luxurious item. And maybe when people started producing these things, inventing these things, there was no such idea that society becomes like this, and all people, most of the citizens now drive, and it is based on the cars. When they produced for the first time, maybe it was a very rare, luxurious item for maybe leisure. So when we have a more productivity based on these new technologies, they come with a higher productivity, which means a higher income and a higher production. If there is a higher production, if there is no demand, there is no industry. So it goes in tandem. And agriculture, for instance, employed 80% of populations in advanced economies before, but because of agriculture revolution and because of industrial revolutions, the number of people working for agriculture is coming down, and we have more income and we have more capacity to consume industrial products. And then there is a service sector which is now increasing based on the income. So the fourth point is new occupation and new industry. So once again, tourism in Fiji or in Cambodia and so on, it is becoming a major kind of industry. It's not totally new from Roman time, from Renaissance time. In 200 years ago in Japan, some people travel all over Japan for sightseeing, but it was a very limited, rare product. But today it is very common. So it's not totally new, but we can have a new industries like guiding the people and training people. I have several friends who are executives. They hire trainers for running a marathon of 42 kilometers. They hire people to accomplish running 42 kilometers. There was no such occupation 20 years ago. we have now such a kind of leisure, such a scope, or such a money to spend for hiring trainers just to run 42 kilometers. There are so many coaches, there are so many trainers, there are so many guides. How to use money in China, among rich people, they hire people to know how to spend money. So, if there are, space, if there are more productivity, I would say there are more demand for new occupations, and we don't need to worry about it. And if we don't have a jobs, we can just take more rest at the house, and it's also welfare to us.
Can I just put to you, though, President Nakao, one question we've had here, which is ADB's assessment of the impact of technology and jobs is optimistic. Do governments run the risk of being unprepared for the downside?
Of course, the government should so many things, and I shouldn't speak too much, but the government should, of course, in education, they must have a better education for the kids and to be adaptive to the lifelong changes, evolutions of a work pattern, and the speed of a change of a work is very rapid, so the students know how to learn, in addition to remembering something. And also, of course, the redistribution of income, progressive tax system is important because of widening equality. We cannot just let market do everything. Right. And we should secure the infrastructure, broadband, and transport is needed even for e-commerce. And we need the energy. So in many countries, there are still blackouts of several hours a day. So without power, we cannot use IT anyway. So we need so many basic things, and I'd like to come back to this issue.
Sure, a mixture of policy tools. You need a progressive rate of taxation, safety nets for those workers who may be vulnerable to losing their jobs. A question here that's had a lot of interest. I'll put it to you, Carlos Dominguez, because you talked about retraining the workforce here in the Philippines, and of course you've got a huge workforce, a lot of people, particularly young. The question is, how do we ensure education / training for those people losing their jobs in obsolete industries that helps them find new jobs?
Well, we have to be, some jobs are going to be destroyed, but some jobs are going to be created. I'll give you an example. 10 years ago, I didn't know that you would have a job, a Filipino could have a job editing a motorcycle magazine in the Balkans. But there's a lady who does that. She's the girlfriend of my son. That's all she does. She edits this magazine, and it's published online in Czechoslovakia or somewhere in that area. And that's what her job is. 10 years ago, that job didn't exist. So as we move ahead, while some jobs are going to be left behind, some jobs are going to be created. And we must make sure that the education of our people, as President Nakao says, teaches them how to learn throughout their lives. Because the future is going to be a future of learning. There's going to be a lot of changes, so people have to be adaptive. And
perhaps change jobs every 10, 15 years, not the same job.
I think 5 years.
Really?
Yes, probably 5 years. The day of, the company, the salaryman staying in their company for their whole lives, I think is gone.
Right, interesting.
And I think it's scary, but it opens actually a lot of opportunities.
I think scary for the baby boomer. But
I would
millennial, I think they are not scared with that kind of thing.
Yeah, for the baby boomers. But, us baby boomers are, towards the end of the boom already. So
it's boom or bust. And notwithstanding your reunification of the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Thank you for that. That was very impressive work, just putting it back to Czechoslovakia. Yeah. But anyway, thank you for that comment. I'd like to come to you, Sri Mulyani, because I know that, I mean, we heard Minister Aiyaz there talking about industrialization in Fiji, and we know that industrialization is something that's quite different from manufacturing, because industrialization, of course, involves the modernization of entire economies, including the service sector and, you know, services and so on. But in Indonesia, you do want to boost your competitive manufacturing sector, and there's a question that's come in here, which is relevant to you, which is, are policymakers worried that jobs in the export sector could be reshored to developed countries due to technology investments there? Because that's one thing that we are seeing is a reshoring of automated jobs in manufacturing going back to countries that stopped doing it a while ago. Is that something on your radar?
Well, if we follow, for example, President Trump's policy, for example, the washing machine and all those, which is now you want to be back in the United States. Many of the developing countries, actually the idea to transform their economy from primary base, usually from natural resource or from the agriculture, move into more manufacturing, construction, then to services sector. This is based on the idea that within the country you transform, but at the same time, the economy of your country connected to the global economy that is going to consume, but at the same time, they are going to be able to import the capital from more richer country. This is what happened in the past 30 years that is actually enabling country like China or ASEAN in general to be able to transform from primary base into more manufacturing base. Certainly, the current situation with the rhetoric of more protectionist and the more inward-looking, this is going to be one of the threats, not for the economy in general, but also in terms of how we are going to make sure that technology progress is creating shared prosperity. That is prosperity that can be fairly enjoyed and shared by many countries in the world. Before we talking about technology, in the past we've already struggled with this. I was in the World Bank, we have like 2 goals, in which one is reducing poverty into 0, in this case quote unquote, and sharing prosperity. And digital divide has been one of the threats that those countries left behind cannot catching up. Now with this situation, I think this threat is even more. Divide within country and between country in this case. For Indonesia, of course, in the past 70, 80, 1990, we are really relying on manufacturing which is based on labor-intensive, low wage. And that's mean also low skill this. But more and more now, I think the Indonesia need to diversify. And this is exactly what the government is trying to do. On the one hand, we still have a labor force which is still rely on this low skill, low wage. But we are more and more investing 20% on our budget for education and training so that we will be able to actually invite more, attract more manufacturing, which is based on scale. I still very much believe, although there is a trend, or at least coming from this reshoring of the manufacturing labor, I think at the end, in many countries, they really need to have what you call it the supply chains. So you really need to have a supply chain. You cannot do everything in one country. Right, maybe it could be done.
It's that international supply chain.
But then you are going to have the
global supply chain.
And that will still create an opportunity. But certainly this is not an easy time. I must say it's not an easy time, especially with the robot automatization, which is going to really changing the core and the nature of many manufacturing industry in the world.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to pick up this issue of reshoring and the impact it might have on competitive manufacturing sectors? Although I think you have said in the past, President Nakao, that Asian consumers or Asian markets are looking more and more to the domestic consumer rather than the export-led model.
That's right. Past. And often there is mentioning that Asia is a factory and consumption is in the advanced economy, especially the United States and Europe. But in reality, China's growth, for instance, has been more dependent on the growth of a domestic market, including investment and consumption. Japan is now, has been regarded a kind of export-oriented, but current account was always deficit until 1960s because Japan had to import a lot. So in any country, of course, the ultimate goal is welfare through consumption and also investment in road and so on. Asia's growth is much more dependent on the domestic demand, consumption and investment. And I'm now realizing after I came here, I have been here for 5 years, and I noticed that the Asian economy is more and more draw on the entrepreneurship within the countries and technology advancement in countries. And also, it's not just about the hard technology, but as you mentioned, the shared economies, restaurant chains, and the new ideas about doing business. There are so many innovations in Asia. It's not just catching up based on the lower wages. So when I visited countries, I met leaders and ministers. There are so many awareness of the importance of technologies. Of course, there is a concern. And when I visited India, there was a question whether the you said reshoring of BPO business to the Silicon Valley, for instance. But generally, I think, as you said, there is a natural comparative advantage and the importance of a value chain. So we cannot totally reverse this order, even if there is some protectionistic movement. This wouldn't change, and I think Asia can enjoy more from these evolutions.
Yeah, sure.
I just want to say something. In all of this, I think there's obviously a lot of positives to it too. But I think in all of this, governments need to be very mindful of the impact of the introduction of technology or smart technology or artificial intelligence, because you need to have a very human face to it too from a government perspective. Because whilst the companies may, for example, decide it's feasible to put a robot in or bring about certain changes through technology, governments need to be mindful that this will be the impact on the human face of the groups of humans. So how do we actually, it's okay to say, for example, yes, they'll change their jobs every 5 years, we have to re-engineer the skill sets. But we need to play that facilitative role. Otherwise, that can create a lot more disparity between those who are skilled and those who are unskilled. And I think in the same way, I mean, the inter and intra gap because of the advent of technology through sovereigns, I think is very, very important to, to address. In our country, for example, and many of the Pacific Island countries face this, whilst the urban centers may actually have your 4Gs and what have you, and the internet connection, your island populations don't actually have it. So you're creating a bigger divide in respect of education, in respect of access to information and business opportunities also. That we have to be mindful of.
Well, we've had a question here that you may just want to elaborate on what you just said, Minister, which is we talk about AI, machine learning and deep learning, but what about the basic digital understanding across the mass audience who's not even close to the third industrial revolution, let alone the fourth?
Absolutely, and that's, I think, one of the points I was trying to illustrate, that, we have, for example, people in our country who've never used a computer before. Now, what we have done, for example, we've set up what we call community internet centers. So we normally use schools, and we set them up in rural areas. So we provide the computers, the webcams, and what have you, with the condition that the students can use it during the day. But after hours, the school must be open so the farmers, the villagers that live in the rural area can actually come and use it. Now, initially, nobody wanted to come and use it. The moment you could tell them that they could make a free phone call over Skype to a relative overseas, everybody was there. So suddenly everybody wanted to learn how to use a computer and how to use Skype. So I think that's the sort of kind of creative approach we need to take. We are currently, we've launched our digital television platform. So, we're using both terrestrial and also satellite technology for that. So what we're doing is we're Wi-Fiing schools, because there's a huge gap between schools, those in the islands or in the, deep rural areas, to those schools in the urban centers. So once we Wi-Fi all the schools, we're able to get the students to use that technology, for betterment of themselves and also improving their skill sets.
I mean, to you, Carlos Dominguez, then I'll come to Taro. There's a question here which is related to what Minister Aiyaz has been talking about, and it says, will technology make income inequality more extreme with a small leisure class and the rest in low-wage services? Is that a danger?
If we do not be mindful, that will happen. However, again, we must make sure that the private sector also is encouraged to do training, that we have incentives for private companies to upgrade the knowledge and skills of their own people, because I'm sure the government cannot do it all on its own. That's number one. Again, on the other hand, you know, having a cell phone, a smartphone, is very empowering for small businessmen, for SMEs, for people who are selling, say, you know, trinkets to the tourists. If you can have a system where they can pay through QR codes, you know, that will be helpful in improving their livelihoods and incomes. But the government has a role there to make sure that the frequencies for the internet are available to the service providers. So again, you know, it's a smart. We have to govern in a smarter way. We have to anticipate the potential problems, and we have to take the necessary action. But again, we have to also encourage the private sector to share the burden here.
Right. Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso, so we know that Japan has the fastest aging society in the world, and that this presents a challenge to the Japanese economy because companies must adapt or die because they face a shrinking talent pool. So perhaps you could tell us what you're doing, how you're using technology and automation to meet this challenge of the aging society in Japan.
Two cases. In case of Japan, labor force is decreasing due to the rapid aging. Aging is a very serious issue. 77 years old, still hard work. Huh? Fortunately, unfortunately, I still can't go to the Fiji island yet, but anyway. Therefore, the technological advancement is expected to boost the economy through the productivity revolution by creating the new value addition. However, the technological advancement could lead to the wider inequality, as I said at the very beginning, and lower labor share of income. To minimize the economic and social costs, it is important to enhance the resilience of the human capital. Individual education is a key to this end. Well, how are we going to do it? Many ways. Higher education for householders, or the tuition deduction and introduction of the technological program for lower income families and so on. These we have done already, and slowly but steadily it's expanding, I think. And we also intend to expand the recurrent education and so on. But Naravi-san said at the very beginning, why Japan has so many robot producers, makers in Japan? 6 out of 10 are Japanese robot makers. Why? I think robots will help my heavy duty. That is the ordinary Japanese labor's mentality. How it comes? Many countries, robots take my jobs away, so I will lose my job. This is how should European way of thinking or American way of thinking. But in Japan, robot reduce my heavy duty. That is our understanding. Why? Have you ever read a Japanese manga? Have you ever read before, such as Astro Boys? No. Recently, very famous in Asia is Doraemon and so on. Yeah. You better ask your children or grandchildren. They know far better than yours. Their mentality is always this. Whenever kids in trouble, robot comes and helps. No exception. Always robot helps the children. So, ordinary laborers does not have any hesitation to have a robot in the factory. They help us. They don't take my job away, but they help. This kind of basic mentality, you've got to train your children. Otherwise, you always step away or reluctant to have robots. I think you better think that way is a basic education. This is my understanding.
Right, yeah, it's the point that you raised, that it only automates some of a job. It doesn't replace a job. It helps. But, you know, in Fiji, people are using computers and more technologically savvy. In Japan, is everybody, however old they are, very good on a computer and the internet?
You can, I think, this again, my prejudice was dogma, but this, smaho, you know, I can use this too. But nowadays, look at the smaho and smartphone and so on. You can put the information by voice, answer by voice. Now you don't have to use this. Don't forget, technology is improved day by day. So technology, the year later, new technology comes in. Oh, easy. So I think Nanabe-san was saying exactly true. Ordinary generation, my generation, can't use a computer, typewriter. No. But nowadays, because of improvement of technology, you can put your information by voice. Answer by voice. Yeah. So easy to communicate. This is an improvement.
Very interesting. But there's a question here which has had a lot of people supporting it. It's the complete opposite of what's happened in Japan, a very advanced, mature economy, because this point is posing this question. What about low-income countries which haven't even adopted the third industrial revolution? How do you keep them from being left behind? Often they lack the necessary infrastructure and human capital. How do you stop them from being left behind? So Japan is at one end of the extreme. And actually, it's only the Republic of Korea, Japan, and China that have aging societies in Asia. Most others have very young populations who need jobs. Perhaps you'd like to pick that up, Mr. Nakao.
Yes, ADB is, of course, for eradicating poverty and working for development of countries. So, of course, we can talk about a more optimistic future kind of a view, or rosy ideas of the future. But at the same time, there are so many kind of remaining challenges, the same challenges as we had before. That is to ensure that kids go to primary school, and we have basic health services. And once again, power is needed for many countries. When I talk with the minister of certain countries, the country still has 7 to 8 hours of blackout every day, and many parts still don't have water and sanitation. So we should, of course, pursue these things, and that is a basic things we should still adhere to. And of course, the new technologies can kind of give opportunities of leapfrogging. One important area is financial technologies or financial inclusions. In some island countries, because of a mobile banking system, without the bank branches, without sending cash to small islands, they can still use account in the banks, and also they can get the credit based on, for instance, AI technologies for credit scoring. We can use a remote education system, remote health system to provide better services. We can use these technologies, but at the same time, there are still basic things we should continue to follow.
Just pick up, I mean, I know we're talking about technological change, globalization, and jobs in Asia, but it's all really related, as Mr. Nakao has just picked up there, on this issue of small island states or developing countries such as yours, whether you can use leapfrog technology, you know, in all sorts of sectors, education, health, energy. You know, energy could be made so much cheaper if you use, you know, all the technological advances are available. Do you buy into this leapfrogging?
Definitely. I think, you know, we don't necessarily have to go through the throes of what perhaps some of the other countries went through, and that is that they followed a linear sort of development as far as access to technology was concerned. So we can actually leapfrog and learn from the mistakes of what others have gone through, and indeed tap into the technology. And some of the technology, of course, has become now affordable to be able to access. But the problem still remains, as President Nakao said, that there's some very fundamental issues that some of the small island states or low-income countries need to face. And that is, for example, what's the point of having a smartphone? You can't actually use your voice if you can't charge your phone because you don't have electricity. So they don't actually have access to electricity. They don't necessarily have access to other amenities that will help you to be able to access that technology. So I think that is a very fundamental issue. And in terms of the original question you asked about how do we actually fund that? How do we ensure that we don't leave them behind? And obviously it means funding. And now we need to be able to be innovative about how we access that finance. ADB, of course, does lend to small island states, in this particular case the Pacific Island countries, and we're very grateful for that. Of course, I'd like more concessional funding. That's something that we've been discussing too, because of things like climatic events. I mean, we've had this discussion about, you know, trigger points to access concessional funding because of climatic events. But nonetheless, I think that's a very fundamental issue in respect of addressing those fundamental infrastructure issues to be able to get people to access technology. If you do not have those basic amenities at your doorstep, then you won't necessarily be interested in having a smart mobile phone. They won't consider that very smart, actually, because they cannot actually have access to clean water. So we are using, for example, new technology to get, you know, localized water systems, using new technology to do that, to be able to access water where previously they have not accessed water. So those are the sorts of things we need to be able to address, and funding is very critical.
I mean, I think what you've highlighted there is that, as your report said here at the ADB, that job automation only happens when it's technically and economically feasible for it to be so. And that's one of the things that you said. Do keep your points coming on Pigeonhole Live. We've heard a number of issues here highlighting the findings of the report, that there won't be as much job displacement as was once feared because it's only aspects of human jobs that will be automated. We've heard about how an increase in consumer demand will offset any kind of displacement. We've also heard about how technology in both AI and industrial robotics will drive new opportunities and create new jobs. And as I just said also, you know, you'll only have automation if it's technically and economically feasible. We've heard the downside, that it could exacerbate economic inequalities, income inequalities, and that there is a lot of space for governments to do things such as, you know, progressive rates of taxation, safety nets, retraining programs, and so on. So perhaps give us a sense of what the mood is here, whether you think it's more beneficial, more positive than the downsides. But there is one question here which I'll put to you, Carlos Dominguez, which is... sorry, something just came up, which is about retraining and skills and so on you talked about. But they're just asking a fundamental question, which is, we talk about how education should change to cater the evolving fourth industrial revolution. But classroom methods have not changed in decades, is the question. And it is asking what needs to be done at the classroom level.
Well, in the first place, I think you have to have very good teachers. So the training of teachers is very, very fundamental to improving the education system. We are in the Philippines. We have adopted the K-12 system. I think we're one of the last countries in the world that had the old system of 6 grades and 4 years of high school. But with that, I think with the 12 years of basic education, I think we will move ahead very quickly. We also have improved our classrooms. We're building more climate-resistant classrooms right now. Philippines has a lot of natural disasters, and unfortunately, we lose a lot of classrooms because the classrooms are used to house people who have lost their jobs, their houses. So we're improving the housing standards as well as the classroom standards. We are also providing, there are private companies in the Philippines that are helping schools by providing them internet access, by providing them computers, and the government itself is doing that. On the training side, we have a very effective agency called TESDA. They do skills training, and they train people in welding, in dental hygiene jobs, and in jobs that are required in the internet industry. So we're moving in those directions. But again, as I said, we have to inculcate the love for learning from the first grade.
Right.
Can I?
Yes, of course, Mr. President.
I mentioned rather optimistic views about the technology's impact, and at the same time, as I said, we should look at the more fundamental things. Another important point I'd like to mention is that there are discussions about the growing inequality. And it's a very serious issue in developed countries as well as developing countries. And there was a time that the market could solve most of the issues. But there are some protectionistic movements and more inward-looking or more unilateral actions instead of multilateralism. I cannot easily criticize these movements because people now see growing inequality because of trade, because of globalization, because of integrations of countries, because of technologies. And we should look at this issue very seriously. Often people gathering in these forums, in Davos, in many places, are mostly people who are more educated and who earn more from globalized economy. But in countries, mining workers, factory workers, especially developed countries, they are in a sense left behind. And income is now different so much. And I talked with one deputy prime minister in country that education is now fixing the classes instead of promoting mobility in the society. So progressive income tax, although it is more difficult to apply because of competition between countries, corporate income tax is more difficult to apply. But we need to have a system to tax fairly and to use those revenues for social protection needed for the society, for unemployed people, the kids of unemployed workers, for instance, basic health protection. Those are so needed, and I think countries together, because there is a competition between countries, but I think governments should address these issues more seriously. Otherwise, we cannot keep this kind of system of open, multilateral system because peoples are becoming inward. And the governments in countries, democracies, are supported by people. And without the people's support, taxpayers' support, workers' support, we cannot sustain this system, even if it's good for as a nation as a whole. But if the income is more distortedly allocated to the richer people, we cannot sustain this system.
Well, you've answered a question here that has had quite a bit of interest, which is how do tax policies mitigate the inequality issue? Any concrete idea on policy instruments? I think you've given a couple there, President Nakao. Sri Mulyani, put a question to you here which has come through, but I'll just elaborate on it. Of course, we know that the kind of jobs, the millions and millions of jobs which are at risk from automation are those repetitive skills, the kind of the factory worker, and a disproportionate number of such workers are women, often. And so we've got a question here, which is how can we reduce the gender gap in access and use of technologies in MDCs? Sorry, I've come to you because you're the only woman here, but it's something that everybody should be doing something about.
I think it would be nice to ask about women to the men, because they
I am going to, but I thought I'd ask you since we hadn't heard from you for a while.
First, I think I would like to also comment from what President Nakao mentioned earlier. When we discuss about technology, we should not separate it from the issue of the macro policy, especially on fiscal taxation. And this has been discussed in the G20 as well as the IMF World Bank, how getting even more challenging to tax in order for all those government role that is going to prepare the country to be able to be ready. This government role need to be supported by the sound and sustainable fiscal policy. And the situation today is actually not easier to tax because of this nature of this technology change, as well as the question about who need to pay tax, where to be collected, how we are going to compute. You talk about Google, Facebook, who will get what, how much, which country. I think this is going to be the discussion which is going to be very relevant today and in the near future. But back to that, the question that you have about the woman and the role of women, especially in many of the industrial chains, usually based on a labor-intensive and the manual labor-intensive, usually women, which is recruited. They are very much what you call it, persistent and work in one automation or repetitive work that can be easily replaced by the robot. Now the question here, how we are going to address the issue of the gender, not only the disparity on the opportunity, but also disparity in terms of the production. I think that will require a lot of what you call it the gender agenda within the context of technological change. First, the gender agenda of how to create this equal opportunity. When I was in the World Bank, we know that many of the women is disadvantaged because of the legal and norm, which is hampering them to get the same, what you call it, opportunity. For a boy, when you are still a kid, the girls and the boy have a different opportunity because of the family values, norm, legal sometimes. And when you become a woman, you cannot own property because of you are not having a titling under the name of woman as a head of household. So those kind of obstacles that need and require to be addressed, continue still need to be addressed. And second one, I think, when you talk about technology, ironically, or in this case, by contrast, we repetitively mention that one thing that cannot be replaced by technology is the affection, love, caring, which is by nature, usually woman is much more in a better advantage. Technology cannot pregnant, they cannot take care of baby, they cannot they cannot breastfeed, they cannot take care of elderly. So I think in a way, that is actually the area that the women have all the natural advantage. More and more, the future work is going to be more related to what you call it human relation. And this human relation is the one which is by natural woman is much more advantage. The question, do we have a regime policy that will recognize that and then value that in the market? Let's say if you do the domestic work, you are not actually getting wage because of you are cleaning up the bedroom, you are preparing breakfast, you are reminding your children to do the homework. That is actually all the male in the family saying, oh, that is by default is a woman and I don't even have to pay for them. if you quantify, I think the salary should be higher than the Minister of Finance salary or CEO salary.
For sure.
Very good point.
Right.
Although, as the mother of 4 children, I think I would quite happily have given my children to a robot to be looked after.
You will be
Perhaps-
happy, but your children will not be happy.
I know, I'm only
They are
joking.
not going to call you mama
no,
then.
I know, no, that's true.
Exactly. So
Sometimes you feel like a robot, though,
Yeah,
don't you, when you've had a
exactly.
sleepless night?
I understand fully your situation,
But,
Zainab.
yeah.
We are the only 2 women here.
Yeah, yeah.
That's right.
So, yeah, I think I agree with what you said. Just to develop what you said about human capacity, I think when we're talking about this issue of whether, automation will replace jobs, the kind of jobs in manufacturing and so on, which made Asia rich, is that all going to be turned back because the robots are coming? Artificial intelligence is based both on internet services and on industry, and both of those could pose a challenge. But I think that the point that Sri Mulyani brings up about human capacity, we have the skills to negotiate social relationships. We are able to, undertake complex reasoning and creativity. These are not things which can be given to, to automation and robots. So perhaps just in conclusion, I'll come across to all of you just to say, we've discussed the pitfalls and the advantages and so on. So given what we've talked about in terms of what human capacity can deliver, that this is the best computer, the human brain, it's never been bettered. Technological change, globalization, impact on jobs, it will be good or not. Starting with you, Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso, ultimately, it will be good for Asia, not just Japan.
Technological advancement is definitely good for not only Japanese but for everyone. I do believe so. I think technological improvement will help not only the muscle something or you, but at the same time the artificial intelligence will help. There's so many things will help, but at the same time, Governor Nakao-san was saying, if the technology improved, then people got enough money, enough time, and so on. Then there is another necessity for such as helping for running, or might be a good example. Things like that will help for new job creation, I think. So technology, well, how are we going to coordinate with them? It very much depends on the leader of the country. I do believe so. The politicians desperately don't leave it as it is. Well, that can be disaster, but must keep under certain control. It's quite important. That is my understanding.
Thank you. Carlos Dominguez, Minister, Secretary.
Well, technology has certainly made life less brutal and less short. In the ages, I was just making a quote earlier that, when ADB started, 1 in 4 people were living in abject poverty. Now it's only 1 in 10. And that comes from good technological advance. Technological advances in medicine, technological advances in making jobs easier. People don't have to haul heavy loads now. They have machines to do it. And of course there are downsides to it, but I'm very hopeful that the human being is smart enough to mitigate those risks. And I think our governments are, as the minister from Fiji pointed out, have to be mindful of the risks. But we should not be paralyzed by them. We should embrace innovation. We should look at the bright side. But again, provide safety nets for those who cannot catch up all the time.
Great, good. Aiyaz?
I think there are two aspects. One of what the President highlighted, I think many of the countries that are perhaps currently reacting to globalization and the move of jobs offshore are those countries that perhaps do not have a very good safety net for those people who are actually transiting, or they occupied jobs for example, centuries, but there are no jobs no longer available. So those countries actually don't have the safety net. And I think a case in point would be USA specifically. So, for example, what we have done, we have now subsidized electricity if you earn up to $30,000 a year. We have free education, targeted subsidy bus fares, etc., and also access to free technical colleges courses. Now, that I think is very important. Secondly, I think what we need to be able to do as a government is we need to be able to individually, as sovereign states, specific to your country, be able to anticipate what impact that technological change or technological changes will have in your country. So you need to be able to plan better. So in our case, obviously, it have an impact. So one extreme case is we've got before Parliament an online safety bill about, for example, issues of pornography that's now available online, or whether it's fake news that maybe Europe is dealing with. So you need to be able to anticipate that. You need to be able to anticipate, okay, what impact will this technological change will have in the hospitality industry in 5 or 10 years' time. So you plan better, and in that way, technological changes actually becomes a tool, and a fantastic tool to advance your economies.
So it's a kind of custom-based response depending on the challenge to each particular sector. So driverless cars, the impact it might have on long-distance lorry drivers.
Absolutely. I mean, and then you can also for example, have courses available in your universities and your technical colleges to be able to then have these people prepared when that change actually takes place. And that's very important.
Think ahead.
You have to.
Yeah. Well, as Minister of the Economy, I guess you must be doing a lot of thinking ahead. Sri Mulyani.
Well, I am an optimist in this case. We firmly believe from all this, the history of the world showing that the change is certainly for the better. And at the same time, we also recognize there is always a downside risk. So as a human being which is learning from the history, I think we will be able to prepare and capitalize this technology change for the better, but without losing the humanity. So I think the aspect of this, what you call it, social safety net, what is going to be then the role of human being when you are live side by side with a robot, with artificial intelligence, when each of what you decide, what you say, what you click is going to be captured in the data, and the data can then analyze your behavior. I think we really need to then think and imagine what kind of society that we are going to have. This is in addition for our job today in order to prepare, or at least even before preparing, to understand what does it mean, this change that will bring to the society. I think that is going to be very important. Many governments actually try to guess. It's Indonesia in this case. We are preparing Minister of Industry, preparing Industrial 4.0 for Indonesia. Minister of Education is preparing the curriculum for 4.0 industries change. Minister of Tourism said that the tourism under the Industrial 4.0. So we are all talking all those, the preparation. But sometimes when we design and define this kind of change, I think our own natural tendency of resisting change or see the change is too difficult is always there. And that's why the first that need to be addressed is our own mindset, that change is actually will come. And usually when I talk to my own children, sometimes I discuss, I'm worried about what is going to be the future of a job for my even grandchildren. And my children will say, Mom, why you're thinking so complicated? I mean, this is not the kind of thing that you really need to think. I mean, let's just enjoy and understand what is happening. And that is exactly what the millennial is doing. Another thing, in the past, baby boomer like us is usually love to have a more constant ownership and repetitive thing. The millennial, they love experience. I don't have to own it as long as I can experience things. So their mindset, utility, function is different from the generation older than that. And I'm sure the generation of my grandchildren is going to be also
even more different.
And that is, we try to always planning to detail. I think we can come to the basic, then really addressing the issue of risk. Because the pornography, cybersecurity, terrorism, these are all which is using this digital economy in a much more advanced with one specific vice objective, that we really need to address those kind of downside risks.
Final question to you, President Nakao. What is the ADB doing to help regional governments harness these new technologies for inclusive growth and jobs and so on? Please, your final word.
Thank you very much. This discussion is so rich, and I learned a lot. And for ADB, I'd like to mention 5 issues very quickly. One is the importance of continued efforts to build a good infrastructure, including broadband and also support for education and so on. The second is the usage of new technologies for our work, like fintech, cloud technology, AI, remote technologies, and so on. We can use these things for any operations, including, of course, climate-related things. And the third, we want to make ADB a kind of a forum for knowledge, and this is one good example. And some of them, we don't have maybe enough resources. We should do it with the World Bank or OECD and so on. But there are many issues for fiscal policies and capital markets development to mobilize more resources, and regulations. Financial regulations should be adapted to the kind of fintech to avoid fraud, money laundering, and the consumers protection, and terrorist financing, for instance. And also there are issues of other issues like data protection, privacy, at the same time promoting sharing of information data for the purpose of better medicine, better education, and so on. And we need maybe good antitrust policy. There are a lot of discussions on this front. And there are many things, and also for governance, for instance, the governance is very important, anti-corruption and tax transparency. Those issues are becoming even more important because of misuse of technologies and globalizations in today's world. And I would like to, fourth, I would like to mention that gender is a very important issue for ADB, and in our operations, we are supporting women, gender-targeted technological and vocational education and training, scientific education, health, and financing, prioritizing support for women entrepreneurs. But your point, whether women are behind, I think technologies are, in a sense, making a progress to the status of women. And we can see that we now have so many professional women working in different kind of areas. I think it is because physical power is not as important as before. And also remote working is possible from house because of internet. We are doing that at ADB. And third, we have maybe better machines in houses. My mother used to go to shopping twice every day, and it was because there was no refrigerator when I was 5 years old, for instance. So there are many good systems to support houseworks, and also men become more friendly to those works. And anyway, so I think gender issue will be improved because of technology. And finally, I'd like to mention the importance of human touch. I still want to be served by the human in the airport or in the hotel, even if it is possible to automate things in hotels. Why do we need to go to Fiji to be serviced by a robot? We'll go to there for human touch.
Absolutely. Please come.
And I think AI might replace my work, but I don't think my mother's work couldn't replace my mother. I mean, AI or robot couldn't replace my mother's work or my wife's work.
I was joking about my children. I love my children.
And also, I would say, why do we gather here? We can do these things in remote way. But because of our laughing, because of voices, because of a smile and so on, this is making sense. So I still want to make the case for the importance of a human touch.
But I still want to ask Taro Aso if I can have one of those Japanese robots to do my housework. Please, next time I see you. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I think, you know, we've had all those alarmist studies in the past. You remember the one by, was it Frey, you know, from Oxford University and so on, looking at the United States, saying 47% of jobs in the US are vulnerable to automation. But we've had the OECD report looking at OECD countries and saying, actually, no, only 14% of jobs are vulnerable to automation. Of course, we've had the Asian Development Bank's report in April saying that, on the whole, yes, millions of jobs may be displaced, but on the whole, the benefits outweigh the disadvantages. I think that's the very clear message from President Nakao and the rest of our panel today, but clearly as he has set out that there is a lot that governments have to do to ensure that new technologies develop in a way that benefits workers, protects their rights, but also works to the advantage of consumers. And after all, workers are also consumers. I hope you found our panel discussion interesting. I certainly have. Thank you for your attention. Enjoy the rest of the forum. From me, Zainab Badawi, goodbye, and thank you to my panel. Thank you. Thank you.